So following the video I brought out with regards to the top 5 dungeons that I like to farm with my warrior, I got an awful lot of comments that said something tantamount to the effect of, why not use a mage? Mages are better for this. Have a warrior to play and a mage to farm, etc, etc. And as I tried to make clear in that previous video and in all the comments since, not everyone has a mage and not everyone wants a mage, which I appreciate. Mage is always going to be number one in Classic for farming. That AoE potential compared to anything that has to go single target is going to make them the best choice. However, if you are someone who does not want a mage, and someone who does like their warrior, and simply likes playing that character, then that video was a view to getting you into the right places to be able to make the best of what you had. To that end, I've decided to bring out this video today, which is going to look at ways to improve your warrior solo farming still. So we've already looked at where you want to be farming, but in today's video we're going to be looking at self-sustain. Now, self-sustain is a big problem for people when they are farming, as obviously because you are by yourself you're not going to have a healer with you, and as a result when you're playing a melee class you are going to be taking a lot of hits. So if you can find a good way of self-sustaining, then this is going to be a big increase on your uptime and improve the speed at which you are clearing out content and making that money. So this video is going to look primarily at in-combat sustain. I'm not interested in the best foods to have or the best consumables, that's possibly a topic for another video. Today we're just going to be looking at ways that warriors can heal themselves while they are in the dungeon fighting the mobs to try and make that gold. So let's dive into it. So like I already alluded to, this video is going to be looking at things that are not going to be in the form of consumables or out of combat regeneration. We're basically going to be looking at set bonuses, abilities and weapon enchantments for the sake of this video, which means that we're primarily going to be looking at 4 main sources of healing. These sources are going to be our Bloodthirst ability, the 6-piece set bonus from the Valor set that you can get from dungeons at high level, the life-stealing enchantment, and the Crusader enchantment for your weapons. That is going to be the 4 ways that our warrior is going to be healing himself throughout this footage. What we're going to do, we're going to take a moment to talk about each of them, where you get them, the pros and cons, and then also at the end we're going to have a look at how much healing they actually provided in this dungeon run that I filmed for you when clearing out Scarlet Monastery Cathedral. So first up we have Bloodthirst. Now Bloodthirst is something that's often not really considered as self-sustained simply because it is a part of your kit. As a warrior, it is probably the spell that you have bound to your most spammed number, whatever key you find that comfortable to use. But it is actually pretty fantastic for self-sustain. Now, we are only going to glance over this because a lot of you will be familiar with Bloodthirst, but what Bloodthirst is, if you aren't familiar, is essentially a 6-second cooldown that gives healing on your next strike and a few strikes thereafter that you land on mobs. Now, this healing is modest, but it does have one big advantage over every other form of self-sustain that we're going to discuss here today, and that is that it is reliable. So your Bloodthirst, providing that you have the rage to use it, is going to heal you on that strike and on the strikes thereafter for the same amount of strikes each time, and it is going to be on a 6-second cooldown on each time, and therefore it is on-demand healing. It is healing when you want it, and that is something that is incredibly valuable. As you will see at points throughout this video, all of the other self-sustain that we're going to talk about is going to be proc based, so sometimes it's going to proc when you're at like 95% and it's not really going to be that useful, and at other times you're going to be begging for it to proc when you're at 5% and it just doesn't. So Bloodthirst, pretty basic, but it is going to be worth mentioning that it is going to be your bread and butter form of self-sustain because it is on demand, shortest cooldown, and something that you can practically spam. Now next up I wanted to talk about the Valor set. Now this is a really interesting one to me because the 6-piece Valor set reads as follows. Chance on melee attack to heal you for 88 to 132. Now that is quite vague. It does not specify the chance for this heal to occur, and it doesn't specify if there is anything that determines whereabouts in that 88 to 132 it actually falls. Now, This is an extremely interesting way of self-sustain as far as I'm concerned, because in order to get it you are going to have to wear 6 pieces of the Valor Set. Now the Valor Set is often overlooked because now that we're more familiar than we were 15 years ago with how the statistics work for powering up our characters, the Valor Set proves for DPS in raids and such to not actually be that great of an item. But it does seem to have its use here. So obviously when you are part of a group, what you want from your gear is very much different to when you're by yourself. And the Valor Set actually is a lot better than what we often use for our DPS in raids because of the fact that it provides us with a lot of stamina and a lot of armour. We are going to be taking hits when we are by ourselves, and that gives increased value to this over comparatively a lot of leather items that we'll be wearing when we're in dungeons and raids. Also, to that end, this is the 6-piece bonus. There are bonuses at 2, 4, 6 and 8 for the Valor Set. We aren't going to be looking at the 8 because we didn't have it for the purpose of this video, but just to glance over it, it does give +8 to all resistances, which does mean that you are more likely to resist a spell entirely from low level mobs when soloing dungeons, so that is something that could be extremely helpful. Not necessarily self-sustain, but damage prevention is tantamount to the same thing, as it will mean that you have a generally healthier character. The set piece for bonus for 2-piece, however, is 200 armour, which, again, if you're DPS, is something that you can easily overlook because you aren't really going to be taking too many hits, but 200 armour is actually quite substantial and is greatly going to reduce the amount of damage you take from these mobs when they are melee swinging at you. The 4-piece is going to give a +40 to attack power, which again is pretty substantial, and does mean that you are going to be able to swing that little bit harder, so you're in combat less and going to be able to kill mobs that little bit faster to increase your gold efficiency. Now, when you combine all these things in, it does give Valor Set quite a lot of value in soloing that it does not have in anything else. It is also worth mentioning that as the phases go along, we will get to a point where this Valor Set is upgradable, which will then mean that the stats that you get from it are also going to be that little bit higher. So do bear that in mind if you're thinking of making the investment of farming this set out. Now that is unfortunately the only negative to this set, is that you will have to farm all of the pieces. Now 3 pieces are available off of the auction house, and that is going to get you a hefty chunk of the way there towards the 6 that you require for this heal. However, you are simply going to have to go and farm the rest of the pieces. Generally speaking, not that hard, but I won't lie to you, I was stuck on 5 out of 8 for quite a long time. But I digress. We're looking at the self-sustain concept here, and every melee swing that you have is now going to have that chance to heal you for 88 to 132. Like I said, with the vagueness here, we don't know how much that's actually going to provide over the dungeon run, but it should be quite interesting to look at the end of the dungeon. Now finally, I'm going to talk about the self-sustain weapon enchantments that I am using here. So these come in 2 formats. We're going to be looking at the life-stealing enchantment and the Crusader enchantment. Now, these are quite different, so we'll discuss each of them individually at first, but just for the sake of understanding how this test is going, I have the life-stealing enchantment on my main hand and the Crusader enchantment on my offhand for this video. Now, proc rates can vary based off of weapon speed. The Crusader enchantment I have is on the faster weapon in my offhand, while the lifestealing is on my slower weapon in my main hand. So do bear that in mind when we look at the results later on. Now, the enchantments themselves, the lifestealing enchantment is going to have a proc that saps life out of the target that you hit and gives that life to you. The Crusader enchantment, on the other hand, is going to be a flat heal that also provides you with a 100 strength buff every time that it procs. Now, it is worth mentioning that the price range for these enchantments is wildly different, so if the results show that one of them is substantially stronger than the other, do bear in mind that at the time of recording for myself, the lifestealing enchantment mats were going to be somewhere in and around the 50 gold mark, whereas the Crusader mats were going to prove to be in and around the 100 gold mark, so it is roughly twice as expensive, at least for me. Obviously prices do vary based on server and when you are watching this video. Now, When it comes to these enchantments, the big thing to remember is that they are procs. So the more you're swinging at the target, the more likely you are to proc it. So these are going to vary based on your gear level, because obviously if you are hitting the target, you have more chance of proccing, and if you are critting, you have more chance of keeping up the uptime on flurry, meaning more strikes again to proc this enchantment. The big pro of these is that the healing is quite substantial when it procs, and in the case of Crusader, it does come with that massive strength bonus as well, which does greatly increase the damage output that you're going to have, so the fights are going to be shorter and you'll take less hits as well. However, they are proc based, like we discussed with our set bonus. These are just going to proc as and when they like. Sometimes they're going to proc numerous times in succession and heal you quite a lot when you need it. Other times they're not going to proc at all and could result in your death, so it does mean that they are quite unreliable. One thing that I would say when I was testing here is that I did find that the proc rate was high enough on these that when I had both of these weapon enchantments and the Valor Set, I was getting a proc of something pretty much every time when I needed it, but that is something to discuss later as to whether it's viable to use only one of these or whether you are going to need the lot. So we'll discuss that at the end. Right now guys, we are going to move into our end segment and look at the results. So, taking a look strictly at the healing that we received throughout this dungeon, this information that we're looking at is our healing done for the entirety of the dungeon run. First of all, the first thing that we're going to notice is Bloodthirst. Now, Bloodthirst is 58.1% of the total healing done, so I can't stress this enough. Proper use of Bloodthirst is going to be your best form of sustain and the best way of improving your survivability when soloing dungeons that you can possibly make. So if you find yourself dying a lot, perhaps you're not using Bloodthirst on cooldown. Obviously you could just be biting off more than you can chew, fighting dungeons that are too big for you. But if it comes to death occurring too much, or simply that you're leaving yourself too low and you have to recover between fights, then proper use of Bloodthirst, making sure your rage management is good enough so that you can always use Bloodthirst on cooldown, may be a good way of looking at improving your sustainability during these dungeon runs. Now, that was not a particularly big surprise to me. However, the remainder of those results were actually extremely surprising from what I was expecting. So we'll take a look at it in sort of the order that shocked me. First of all, we're going to look at the bottom here in the form of the Holy Strength. That is the heal that we received from our Crusader proc. Now, I did expect this to be a little bit higher. Now, 5% isn't negligible. That is going to be healing that you're going to notice, and it is going to be healing that you're going to have access to if you are gearing up for raids and things by default, because you should have your weapons already enchanted with Crusader. There is also the additional factor that you will have the extra strength that procs with this to kill mobs quicker, which in turn means you're going to take less damage. However, I don't think that compensates for the ridiculously lower amount of healing that you receive from this enchantment comparative to the lifesteal that you see directly above it. Now, that lifesteal is the healing we are receiving from our lifestealing enchantment, the one that is half the cost of the Crusader. It does also come with its own form of damage, with the life that it saps from the enemy to give to you. And as you can see on there, the healing is over 3 times as much as what we're getting from Crusader. So if you are looking purely for enchanting weapons to improve your survivability when soloing dungeons, maybe you've got a set of weapons you're using purely for this purpose, then lifesteal is going to be the way forward, in my opinion, for the enchantment to use. It should be that way, given that it is the life-stealing enchantment, it is there in the name. But just due to the notoriety of the Crusader enchantment, a lot of people overlook the other options that are available to you. Lifesteal is clearly a very good option, and one that you may want to consider if this self-sustain is something that you're really looking for to be able to do better in the dungeons by yourself when trying to make a bit of gold. And our final point of self-sustain, our Valor Set, actually came out with more healing, or near enough the same amount of healing, as our Lifesteal and Crusader enchantments combined. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this makes the Valor Set an absolute no-brainer when it comes to the soloing potential that it provides. That amount of healing with the massive increase in survivability that you're going to get comparative to regular DPS gear that you are going to be wearing that's going to have some leather in it if you're optimizing for a warrior. Or of course, it will be played if you are further along. If you are very well geared in raid gear, then it may not be worth using. But for anyone who isn't fully maxed out in the best raid gear around, the Valor Set is going to be a fantastic soloing option. As well as all the armor and stats and set bonuses that we discussed, that one set bonus alone that gives this amount of healing, 20% of the overall healing for the dungeon done from that set bonus, that in of itself makes it an absolutely fantastic option. What I would recommend is you may want to tailor pick which of the 6 of the 8 items that you go for. Obviously if you're going for the full 8 to get that resistances that we talked about, then sure you're going to need them all. But some of these items are better optimized than others, and of course if you have excellent options for gear in some of the slots, you may want to keep those slots available for that gear. But 6 pieces, when it comes to soloing dungeons, looks to me like it's going to be an absolute necessity for that self-sustain. I would say that this dungeon run was a lot quicker than some of the ones that I've done in the past, simply because at no point did I have to sit down and eat. This did prove to be a sufficient amount of self-sustain for me with my playstyle and my gear level, as well as, I'll be honest, my mental state when I was filming this. I was a bit fatigued and not playing to my best, as I'm sure many of you in the comments will let me know when this goes live. But I did not have to sit down and eat at any point, and I think that a big part of that is going to be this Valor Set. I don't think the weapon enchantments did as much for me, and I've had them in the past and still had to sit down and eat. Whereas now that I've got this Valor Set, I feel like my sustain is good enough that I can do Scarlet Monastery Cathedral without ever needing to stop to regenerate my health. But that's going to about wrap it up for this video, guys. I do hope that you enjoy the video. If you did, please do consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It really does help out quite a lot. If you do have any questions about this video or about anything else, please do leave them down in the comments below. But for now, guys, that's going to do it for me, and I hope to see you in the next one. Later.